everybody. I'm here at the West Fork Eatery, which is a restaurant owned by Smoke Camp Crafts, and we are here processing our elderberries for the season. Now that we've harvested our elderberries and brought them inside, it's time to remove the elderberries from the stem to be used to make our signature elderberry apple jelly. The first step, there's a few green berries on here, so I'm going to go ahead and just remove those if I can, put them in my little green berry stash, and then the rest of them, I'm just going to go ahead and lightly push them off the stems. This is the most tedious part of making elderberry apple jelly for sure. And this can be done by freezing the umbels with the stems on. Some people like to do it that way, but for us freezer space is a hot commodity, so we actually just do them fresh to save on freezer space. Alright. And you can see some of the underripe berries also have a reddish hue. That is something that is true of the native elderberry species, which we have here in West Virginia. Sambucus nigra is the scientific name. And these usually become ripe around the end of August here in central West Virginia. And the season lasts till about the first week of September, and that's about it. And then of course elderberries start bearing leaves early in the season in March, and that's when is the best time to make cuttings to propagate your elderberries. And the flowers come on, I'd say early June, sometimes even as late as August. So June through August, they're producing, some of them are still producing flowers, depending on exactly where you are and what elevation you're at. Okay, so I got this one pretty much done. Now, you can see in our bucket, we still have some green berries. So to remove the green berries, the easiest way to do that is to actually take your berries and put them into a bucket of cold water. And then, since all of the green berries rise to the top, you can much more easily see them to be able to pick them out, and there's many few berries to pick through. So I'll be spending the rest of my day picking green berries out of this bucket, and whenever I'm done and have enough to make our decoction, we'll head to the jelly kitchen to make the jelly. So now I'm in the kitchen. I have boiled my elderberries with, this contains 4 quarts of water and about 2 quarts of elderberries. I boil it and then I let it simmer for about an hour. So all the elderberry juice has been kind of cooked down. And now I'm just going to pour this through my sieve and my fine mesh flour sack cloth. Strain out all our berries. Dump these all in there. And then I just take my cloth and I'm going to wrap these up. Of course, it has not boiled that long. And we're actually just going to squeeze that cloth to get all of our elderberry juice into our pot. So I've strained my elderberries and now I'm squeezing all the good juices through the strainer into our decoction. And we've got our juice all ready to go into our jelly. So this is the elderberry decoction that we made by boiling the elderberries and straining them through a fine cloth. And now we're going to pour this into the steam kettle. And I'm just going to run it through the sieve one more time in case there were any small berries that snuck through last time, but it doesn't look like it. So that's great. And that's our first ingredient on our list, 4 quarts of what we're calling an elderberry decoction, which we made using 3.5 pounds of elderberries, and about 4 quarts of water. And you do get a little bit of extra decoction there at the end. And then we're using 4 quarts of organic apple juice. Oops. Now my kettle is getting very hot, so this is great to see on video, because notice I'm pouring my apple juice in, and I know each of these jugs of apple juice is 4 quarts. Woo! Sometimes it gets very hot and the kettle wants to boil over, and currently the kettle's actually off, but because this is a jacketed steam kettle, it takes a lot of time for the heat to transfer from the jacket to the interior. So even though it's off, that steam is still heating and still transferring heat up to 3 to 5 minutes after it's been turned off. So this is the rest of my 2 quarts of apple juice I'm going ahead and adding. And my kettle was preheated, so it's gonna boil quite quickly. It's still off. We're just gonna let it come up to a boil before we add our pectin. In the meantime, I'm gonna go ahead and get out our pure cane sugar. And we're gonna be adding 2 pounds of Dutch gel. I actually purchase the Dutch gel usually from webstaurantstore.com. I think it can also be purchased from Walnut Creek Foods. Of course, if you're making this at home, you'll be using a much smaller quantity, so you can just use Sure Gel, but all of my recipes have been developed to work with Dutch gel, which I believe has a higher level of dextrose than Sure Gel, so it's less pectin, more dextrose, which is just a type of sugar. So it's a little bit less expensive, but you also have to use more of it. Then we're gonna get our sugar out, and this batch calls for 16 pounds. So we actually use 4-pound bags of sugar here. And the reason for that is because of the size of our batches, the 4 pounds, they're already weighed out for us, which makes it really easy. And we don't have to have 50-pound bags of sugar that we end up spilling when we try to weigh it out, that can attract ants or whatever. So we've just found it easier to use the 4-pound bags. Okay, I've got my great big wooden spoon. I gave it a quick rinse before starting. And wood is actually antimicrobial, so we always use a wood spoon. We have metal spoons as well that we use, but I always prefer the wood spoon. And so while this is boiling, I'm going to go ahead and get my sugar opened. And I'm going to lay my spoon across the top. This is an old wives' tale, but it does seem to work, that by laying the spoon across the top of your kettle, you can prevent a boil over. And we have never had a boil over with the spoon across the top, but we've also been really careful not to do that. Okay, it's boiling. I'm going to turn it off a little bit of a second. And I'm going to come over here and get some, this is reverse osmosis filtered water that we use. We use this both for in our batches and for boiling the jars. And I'm just getting a little bit of water here to put on the side in case it does start boiling over. It's kind of my emergency backup, but I really don't want to have to add any water to this batch, and I certainly don't want to have to add that much. It would just be, you know, as little as possible to be able to quell the possible overboil. Okay, now it's really starting to come up to a boil. I've turned it back on. I have it on full blast, level 10. And I'm about ready to add our pectin, which is also going to help drop the temperature a little bit. And here we go. Okay, we're at a rolling boil. I'm going to slowly add our pectin. This has been pre-weighed. It's 2 pounds of pectin going in. And okay, now it's really going to start boiling. It's still boiling. We're seeing it's going in nicely. And I want to maintain the rolling boil that I have going on. So I'm going to stir it and slowly add the pectin. I don't want to temper it too much. I just want to add it slowly and maintain that nice rolling boil. Just inhaled some pectin. It tastes really sweet. And pectin is actually made from orange peels, I believe. So and is also really useful for eliminating toxins in the body. So another reason that jelly is better for you than it appears. It's always good to have a certain level of pectin. It helps, especially if you've been exposed to heavy metals, it helps your body just kind of coagulate and eliminate those. All right, now we're at a real rolling boil. We want it to have a rolling boil with the pectin for about 2 minutes. We're going to keep it at the rolling boil, slowly adding the sugar, all 16 pounds. And okay, it's going down now, so I'm going to turn it back to full blast. Okay, so because that was boiling up, we didn't really get a chance to do what's called our pectin test. So I'm going to turn it off now. We have added a little bit of our sugar. Oops, whoa, there comes a big chunk. Now here's a tip. If you're getting a big chunk of sugar and you're trying to get it in, drop it onto the spoon and then you're not going to splash yourself so much. So we'll add our first bag of sugar in its entirety. We'll get it boiling. We're going to let that sit. And then we're going to do our pectin test just as a demonstration. Although most of the time you'd want to be doing this pectin test right after adding your pectin. I'm going to get a little bit of isopropyl alcohol. This is just 70%. This is called the pectin test, and this is something that Dot taught me in her kitchen. I'm going to continue to stir this sugar in. Now you're supposed to do this before the sugar is added, but in this case we've only added 1 bag of sugar so far because of I added that to prevent the boil over. Make sure everything's well incorporated, and you want to just take a drop of your jelly, or a drop of your early jelly, I guess you could call it, into, you can notice that there is a blob, and it's kind of like Slimer from the Ghostbusters. It's stuck together. It's all in one blob. It's not dissolving into the isopropyl alcohol. So that means that our pectin is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. It's binding all of our fruit and sugar molecules together, and we can confidently proceed with adding the rest of the sugar. So we'll go ahead and do that. And yes, jelly contains an enormous amount of sugar. And these are actually what I call low sugar jellies because we've actually reduced the sugar by anywhere between 25 and 50% depending on the batch when compared to standard jelly recipes. Okay, so I added that. We're going to let it get up to our boil again. All right, so we're boiling and we're rolling. And this batch is going to make approximately 90 small jars, 95-ounce jars, which I think works out to about 450 ounces of jelly, which is quite a lot. So we're adding a little more. Okay, now we are going to add one of our very key ingredients, which is lemon juice. This is our lemon juice. This can be added, really technically it should be added in the beginning, it works best, but we're going to go ahead and add it now. The importance of adding the lemon juice is making sure the pH of the jelly is below 2.9. Anytime jelly pH is above 2.9, it's never going to set. So some people actually use a pH meter, and I used to when we were formulating all of our recipes. It was an absolute requirement. As you're formulating your recipes, until you get to know the fruit you're using and understanding when you're harvesting it. Some people even use a Brix meter to test the sugar level in the fruit. Usually the earlier something is harvested, the higher the pectin to sugar ratio is. So if you harvest something that's not quite ripe, it's going to have a higher level of pectin usually, but all fruits are different. Elderberry happens to be a very, I guess what you call basic fruit. It has a really high pH for however fruits go, it has a high pH. So that's why we have to add an entire cup of lemon juice to this batch, just to ensure that pH below 2.9 so that we get a good gel. And that's always what you're going for when you're making jelly, is the gel. You don't want to get something that's too hard. You don't want to get something that's like a syrup. You want it to be just right. And so now we're just going to stir. We're going to let this cook probably for a good 7 to 8 minutes. So it'll be pretty much, you want to establish a rolling boil for 7 to 8 minutes at a minimum. Some batches take longer. And I'm continually stirring this in a clockwise motion, which some people say that helps align the pectin and sugar and fruit molecules. And when you're making jelly, all those old wives' tales and all of the tests and all of the things that you can use to your advantage to getting a good set are certainly worth doing. They just require a little bit of extra thought and effort. So, okay, now we're getting a really good rolling boil going. So I'm going to stir very rapidly. And I have my water here, which I may end up needing to add here, which we're getting close to an overboil. So I'm just going to add a little bit of water very slowly. And I'm going to have to add a little more, which I really don't like doing this. We're trying to prevent this overboil. And like I said, the jelly batches that have no fruit really tend to overboil. And you guys probably noticed me turning off this kettle probably 25 seconds ago. And maybe less than that, maybe it was 12 seconds ago. And we're still getting this deep rolling boil. So learning to use the steam kettle is certainly a process. Usually when we have new people in the kitchen, we have one boil over a month for about 6 months before the person is trained. So we're always looking for jelly makers. So if anybody wants to come to West Virginia and make jelly, send us a message on the Facebook. If you're really into this thing and you don't mind touching hot jars, send us a call. Maybe we'll get you working in here. All right, so I'm going to let that just boil, do its thing. I'm going to leave my spoon there. In the meantime, I'm going to come over here and start getting our jars set up and ready to go. I'm going to use some parchment paper on our trays. This just helps create the cleanest possible situation for the jars, because the jars essentially have to be immaculate as we go, because these are going straight to stores. Now we do sometimes clean the jars with some, we'll use vinegar and a little bit of paper towel to clean the jars after they're made, but for the most part we really don't want to have to mess around with that too much. So jars usually come in boxes like this, and just open them. They come straight from the supplier, and technically these jars are sanitized and ready to go, but we boil them just because it makes us feel safer, make sure in case the integrity of this box were compromised, and let's say a little ant or bug or whatever got in there, we want to make sure these are going to be perfectly clean. Although they look perfectly clean, we're going to boil them anyway. And so the first step, the way we do this in our small little operation here, there are 24 jars per case. They're 4-ounce jars, but they hold 5 ounces of jelly. We do the flip. And then we keep our box over here. And I'm going to set out, so these are 24 each. So I'm going to set out 3 boxes of jars for right now, for today, for this batch. But I do want to say something about these jars. It's been really interesting trying to source jars lately because of COVID-19. There's actually a shortage of glass right now. So it's September 22nd, and I ordered these. We received these last week, and they were very hard to come by. I paid about 25% more than what I usually pay for jars. Sometimes I can get them as cheap as 20 cents a piece. These cost me about 38 cents each, plus shipping, so it was very, very expensive. right now, and I read in the Washington Post that the reason for that is because currently vaccines are being manufactured, or vaccine bottles are being manufactured. So over 2 billion vaccine bottles are being manufactured this fall, hence the glass shortage. And lids too, because I guess a lot of the lid companies are busy making lids for vials for the vaccine. I do want to go ahead and just wipe my counter down, try to keep the kitchen clean as we go. And I showed you my batch record sheet. This is really important to fill out every day. So I put my name, the weather. The weather we just recorded as sort of, it's interesting to know if your batch didn't set and it was really humid outside. Maybe it was because it was taking a long time for your water to boil off of the batch. Okay, so you can see we have this pectin that is actually precipitated out and has kind of caked on the top of the jelly. And you can see it can fold and it can bend. So this is a really good sign. It's boiled a good amount. And now what I'm gonna do is what I call the drip test. There's several different tests for jelly. We're gonna hold this up to the light. You can see the garden in the background. And what we're looking for is a drip that stays on the spoon for a period of 10 solid seconds. So as you can see, we're starting to get drips that are hanging out and not dripping off, but we really want to make sure it's going to stay on there. So we'll just, yeah, and see how that's staying on there? I'm shaking the spoon. It's not going anywhere. That is a great sign. Okay, so now we're going to do, so it seems to have passed the drip test. I am going to stir in some of that precipitate, or whatever you want to call it, the pectin cake. And then I'm going to do what's called the cold plate test. We're just going to drop a couple drops there, and we're going to check back in a few minutes. And this is either called the cold plate or the wrinkle test. I'm going to let that cook, let our wrinkle test go. In the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and start boiling our jars. Got our boiling water over here, and I'm going to get our trusty tongs. And we just start loading these. I can fit about 20 jars in here, and I like to fit them so they're exactly 2 layers. It makes them much easier to grab out of here and deal with. Okay, we're going to come back over here and check on our test, our wrinkle test. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just scrape this, and you can see this top part is actually wrinkling and it's starting to coagulate into gel. So that's really a pretty good sign. Let's try this one. You can see it's coming together in one little gel packet. Here too, you can see. So this is really pretty good. And I would say we are about ready to rock and roll with dispensing our batch. I'm just going to bring it up to one quick last boil. And we're going to actually dispense this in 3 different batches, or 3 small batches. This is our dispensing unit, very high tech, made out of an old pressure canner and a beer tap. So this is really pretty handy. And we're going to make sure our beer tap thing is down, our beer tap dispenser is down, and we're going to fill this up just about halfway here. Okay, here we go. Not halfway, we're just going to fill it just above our nozzle on the inside of this tank. All right. We want to keep this batch as hot as possible, so I'm going to quickly get my gloves on. We definitely need the gloves when we're filling the jars, not only for heat protection, but also to make sure we're keeping our jars really, really clean. So I have my jars boiling over there. I've got my lids over here. The lids are actually going to get boiled over on the other side over here using this handy pasta strainer. So we've got our pasta strainer, and I'm going to put my lids in the pasta strainer. Did not mean to do that. And we're going to dip them in this boiling water. Whoa. Put those in the boiling water here and get our lids nice and steamy and ready to go. Okay, so we've got our lids. We're going to bring those over here, dump them back into our container. Our system's a little bit messed up right now because of our big moves we've been making, but that's all right, with our new steam kettle. And we're going to get the rest of this batch in here. It's very, very, very hot. Okay, as soon as I get enough of that in there, I'm going to pop my lid on here. And we are going to move over to the dispensing operation. It's the heaviest lift of all. And then I'm going to go ahead and start filling my jars. I usually take about 6 jars out at a time. Okay, so now we're filling up our jars. We just lift up our tap, fill up our jar, always leaving about 6% headroom, sometimes a little bit more. Okay. And we will fill now about 90 jars of jelly. All right, so we're nearing the end of our batch. So we're going to measure the temperature of our last jar. We want this thermometer to read 185 degrees. Then we know that these are all in the safe zone for canning. And this is called a cold packing, even though it's by no means cold. Okay, let's get a view on that thermometer. Oops. 163, 175, 183, 190, 192. All right, our temperature's at 193, so we're well above the 185 requirement. Turn that off, jar up our last jar, and we'll come back in 2 hours and see if these guys set. Thanks for joining me today. See you in a couple hours. It's been 2 hours and we're going to check to see if our batch has set. So, and check it out. We've got a really nice gel in there. Let's give it a try. Let's see what it looks like on our spoon. A beautiful gel, ready to spread on our toast or English muffin.